What's up, everybody? Big Herc, fresh out. You tuned into another edition of our interviews. And I have with me today, Beyond Lockdown, giving his insight on what he been through so you can get it firsthand from him. A lot of you guys be asking me stuff, and I don't speak on what I don't know, and everybody's had a different experience. So I'm going to have this gentleman tell his story so you can get it firsthand from him. So Beyond Lockdown, man, let's start with, some background, like where you grew up and like where you're from, man.
I grew up in St. Louis, Missouri, on the north side actually, and then it's in an area that at that time was like the worst area in St. Louis City, and still to this day it is. So I grew up poor, and by the time I was 10 years old, I was already in and out of juvenile, and went through that and got out of juvenile actually at 17. And didn't make it too long until I went to prison. So that was the path I took, and wasn't necessarily an easy one, that's for sure.
So growing up, did you have any mentors or anybody who kind of took you under their wing, or was there a male role model in your life?
I mean, I had my dad, but he was a part of a motorcycle club, and to me, he was a great dad, but to everybody else, they'd be like, oh, he was terrible. But not a positive role model, no. Like, the only role models I had were the people in our neighborhood that were criminals, so.
Okay. So that was kind of like your introduction into that lifestyle just by emulating what you saw around you.
Yeah, and it was either, because when you grow up so poor like that, it's like, you see these guys with flashy cars and clothes and the girls, and you're like, man, that's what I want to do. And when that's your only way of
outlet.
looking at, yeah, it's like, so I just slowly fell into that, and it's a shame because there's nothing, there wasn't nothing to do except box. We had a boxing club, but even the guys that ran that weren't good role models. So it's like, even though you went there and got to box and do that, the guys that were training you, right after they left the gym, they were in the streets themselves. So it's like, there was no winning.
As a young, like looking back as a young kid in that environment, is there anything you felt you could have done different, man? Or is it just like you think you're a product of what you're around?
I think stay inside. Like, my mom was a really good mom, but she had to work a lot because she's a single woman with 2 kids. And I just always wanted to be out in the street. I was always outside. My sister, she always stayed inside, and then obviously she got older. She went to the Navy and got out of the Navy after 10 years, and I went to prison. So I mean, I don't know if that's a good way to compare it, but I don't know, I was too interested on everything outside.
And what was the nice area where you grew up at?
There was.
I mean, in St. Louis, I mean, like, let's say, for instance.
Like West County, I guess, out in the county somewhere.
So if you would have been in West County, you think life would have been different?
Oh, it would have been way different. What's funny is, until I was probably 11, I'd say 11 or so, I didn't even realize there were so many white people around because it was predominantly black where I lived. So when I first went outside to a county school, because St. Louis is separated, it's its own city and not part of a county. But I ended up going to a county school when I was 11, and I was like, man, I didn't realize there's so many white people out here. So and it would have probably been different because it's just crazy the way the politics of St. Louis are set up. It's not even racial, it's social. Like,
economics, huh?
Yeah, they don't care. It's just politicians are the only ones that advance, so.
Yeah, I always tell people I think demographics plays a major factor, because I know, just like what you said, like about the flashy cars and the guys, and once you get kind of like hooked on that street lifestyle, it's like, man, it rides with you. It's hard to shake that lifestyle. So what led to your first run-in as far as, having to do some type of time outside of juvenile hall?
Like, actually what brought me to juvenile? Or?
What brought you from juvenile, but actually into the state penal system? What led to that?
Gangs, like just trying to be part of something. And like this group of us that were all together in juvenile when we got out, it's like, we weren't even really gang banging, but they would say, oh, they're part of a gang, but we were just a group of kids that were getting in trouble. So I start just carrying guns on me, and we were robbing drug dealers and breaking into their houses, and with them in there. So it just led for like same stuff I was doing when I was 14, I still did when I was 17. And it just caught up with me a lot quicker because I think I was only out for about 8 months before I got arrested for my first adult charge and went to prison.
And do you feel that, you know, the time you did in juvenile hall, did at any point did you reflect on that time to say that, man, this isn't for me, or you just figured, hey, man, this is part of the lifestyle?
I think, because I will say that in juvenile, I was in IYC, Illinois Youth Centers, and they tried, they were really good about putting you in programs and trying to rehabilitate you, but you were surrounded by so many young kids that really had no hope in anything, and you get pulled into that. And I think I did just, this is just part of my life, and that's what I'm going to do. And, yeah, you just accept it as bad as it is. It kind of... So I knew I was going to end up in prison. When I got out, I was like, that's just the path I was going to go on. So it's a shame, really.
So from doing time in the state and, you know, running around with your little buddies from juvenile hall, and, you know, you said after that you got out. And did you catch another case now that led to you doing a significant amount of time after that? Or?
No, that was my first. See, what happened is a friend that was older from our neighborhood, he ended up with a federal drug conviction, and they had that, he had the kingpin status on him. I don't even think they can do that anymore. But so I ended up going after one of the people that testified against him, and then I ended up getting charged tampering with the witness and a bunch of other stuff, and they didn't care if that was my first felonies or not, because I had 14 of them at that point. So they're and then they used my whole juvenile history, even though they say they're not supposed to.
Yeah, they bring that shit up,
man.
That shit, man. Make you look like you're a fucking terror.
Yeah, that's what it's like. My goodness, I ain't that bad.
Yeah.
So I didn't have no chance. By the time I was 18, I was already getting... I didn't expect I was ever going to be getting out anyway. I was like, I'm just going to be sitting in prison now. I just subjected myself to it and accepted it. But
at what point, when you were in prison for that last stint, did you realize that you got to do something to change your direction in life? You got to do something to actually, you know, recreate yourself?
When I was sat in SEG for 26 months, right at the end of my sentence, and it was in there for instance. I actually stabbed some dude, and it was sitting in there for that, and I didn't get a street charge for it, but I got the institutional charge, and he didn't die. I didn't even really hurt him, but sitting in SEG for something like that, and realizing that every reason why I thought I did it was just bullshit, and it just really made me reflect on everything I did all those prior years and realize that it ain't worth it, because none of these dudes that were out there on the yard with me ain't sending nothing to SEG with me. And it just, I think that's just finally what it made me dawned on me that, yeah, this is not what I want to do anymore. I'm done. So, yeah.
What'd you do after you came out of SEG, and as far as to change up your program? Because, you know, the homies were used to you chilling and, you know, participating and, you know, being a rah-rah. I mean, what did you do to, change that pattern, and what type of response did you get?
Well, I went straight from SEG on to a halfway house, to the Dismas house in St. Louis.
Okay.
So that was actually the advantage, because I didn't get back. I got released from segregation. And the halfway house, I don't know how it was when you had to go to one, but you know those places are, they don't care about, they're babysitting. Yeah, I mean, that place is crazy. And I made it through it, though, and got out, but I fell right back into the stuff that I told myself I was going to leave behind. It was actually when I met my wife, because I met her a month after I got out of prison, and from that point forward, it started giving me a reason that now it's more not about me anymore. It's about somebody else. And I think the love she showed me is what I needed, because I didn't really ever have that from anybody. So that's when I start knowing that the only way I'm going to change, I had to uproot myself from St. Louis and move up out of there and just get away from that environment, because Yeah, I mean, I wasn't wanting to go to prison ever again after I met her, and then we had kids and stuff, so that'd be.
And how important you think it is to change your surrounding environment? I know I tell people all the time, it's like, man, you can't, do the same thing and expect a different result. You got to change what you see daily and what you're subjected to.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think it's super important because if it's, I guess it depends on the environment you came from, but like if you're in an urban environment and you have to go in the Dismas house for one, is on Cope Brilliant and Natural Bridge and on the north side of St. Louis in the ghetto, and so it's right like 5 minutes from where I grew up. So it's like no matter what, you're setting everybody that's going there up for failure because you're right by everything you shouldn't be.
All the negative.
And that's why I think it's because it's so hard. It's so hard for you to actually better yourself when you're going to be right back in a negative environment. It's just like prison. When you're in such a negative spot, it's hard to do right in there. It's just it swallows you up and it makes you worse.
And you say you grew up like in a pretty diverse environment. I mean, like I grew up having friends of all nationalities. I know a lot of times in prison you have such a level of ignorance with the racial stuff. Did you ever, experience any of that because of just your, non-bias or the way you grew up, or did you?
Well, that's actually what like was the hardest for me, is the rate, because I never growing up I didn't even, I knew what racism was, but I never had to experience it. But so when I went to prison, that was like the hardest thing for me to get used to, is somebody telling me if I seen some black dude that I knew from the street, man, you can't be hanging out with him. I was like, what are you talking about? And I slowly fell into that though. Like it took years, but I slowly like adapted to those white dudes doing that and fell right into all that stuff. And then it was like I was being somebody I really wasn't at all. And that was really the hardest. And then going from the state to the feds, it was like a whole nother like environment that was slightly different, and it wasn't as segregated like as far as who you can talk to, but they still had that same like attitude of you can't be working out with that guy, you can't be talking to that guy, you can't sit down and chow with that guy. It's like, this is crazy. But at that time I was already so far gone out in left field with it that I was just as bad as all of them. And it took me, because one of my sisters, she has mixed kids, and it took me seeing my nieces and nephews and just really like, man, I can't, like, what am I doing? Like when I look at them and then say like, oh, I don't like half of you. Like it was nonsense to me. I was like,
So you had to unlearn a lot of those bad habits that you picked up in there?
Oh yeah, big time. And that was probably the hardest thing, is like rebuilding yourself mentally to just move away from that train of thought, period, and realize that now you're out on the street, it's a whole different set of rules out here, and just get away from it.
Do you think prison breeds that type of environment? I mean, a lot of people come in and they don't have that mentality, and then, because of the way the structure is, you're almost forced into that, and it seems like prison actually perpetuates that, which spills onto the streets when these guys get out.
Oh, definitely. I think it's set up to where they would rather the blacks, whites, Mexicans, all of us fighting each other, so we don't focus on them and the nonsense they're doing and getting away with. And it's set up to just hate everybody. Like they'll purposely do stupid policies. Like when they try to integrate cells and put black and white guys together, they knew that was going to cause problems, but they did it on purpose so nobody was focusing on them. It's stuff like that. I think
it's like they're experimenting with you up in there. Let's see how long it takes before it kicks off.
Like, why even do it? Because they know it's going to cause problems. But that's, I think, all they do is like to cause problems. Just like politicians out on the street, they see like who they can put up against each other so they can come in and save the day and look like the good guy.
Yeah, it's pretty manipulative, man. I mean, I know I've seen a lot of just trickery going on, and then they always make it seem like they have the answers to everything. So having met your wife, a month after you got out, and realizing you had to make some changes. How did you go about doing that to become the person you are today, to be, somebody who's productive, who doesn't want to go back to prison?
It's a hard question because it's still hard to this day, because it's like it's hard to let go certain, not even thoughts, but certain behaviors that I had that like I try to get away from, but then certain things from my past will pop up, or somebody, and I'll make the mistake of talking to them. So that's why I knew I had to separate myself from St. Louis if I was going to change. But it took me from 2009 to 2012. My dad died January 2012, and that's kind of what, because me and him are pretty close, and it kind of just really hit me like I just want to start over. So I moved, and that's kind of when, in my mind, I was like, I need to be a productive person in society. I was tired of people looking at me as a stereotype that I was living up to.
Mm-hmm.
So that is kind of what really made me start thinking like I need to change everything about myself. Obviously, I can't change the tattoos, but my mannerisms, the way I carried myself, I mean, the way I approached people, everything changed. Like, I start reading books about like entrepreneurs, but more on the behaviors of like successful people.
Mm-hmm.
And what is that one book, 7 Habits of Highly Successful People?
Mm-hmm.
I read that book multiple times a year now, because I try to keep that kind of stuff in my head to know like this is how I want people to think of me, not as a former convict or any of that. So that was what it was though. My dad dying, and he died knowing I was doing right. So I was like, I'm not ever going to fall back in that negative lifestyle, and went from there.
And, what are some of the things you're doing as far as like, what's a day-to-day for you as far as life after? You made this change, you become this productive person. What does a typical day consist of for you?
Work. I drive a truck, and I own my own truck, and I haul heavy equipment, and that's almost all I do every day. So
Okay.
But I try to also like talk to a lot of equipment dealers, where I'm calling people a lot on the phone, talking, and the advantage there is they can't see me right then and there, so I build that relationship on the phone with them. So when they do see me, even though they're like, you could see some of them like get taken aback a little, like, oh, this is the guy I've been talking to, but I already built that relationship with them, so it that helps a lot, because I don't know what it is with people, and I mean, I guess I don't know how I would take it if I seen myself walk up to me in like a business environment, because even if I have a suit on, I'll put a suit on and talk to some of these guys when I first see them, and you can still see them like take a little step back, like, good grief. But yeah, so I mean my typical day is just of driving. Like, I drive probably 3,000 to 4,500 miles a week. So
Okay.
yeah.
What kind of advice would you give to somebody, man, who's looking to kind of make that transition, and they're trying to, somehow become a positive person and to, make changes in their life? I always tell people, first off, change your environment. Second off, change your friends, and just set goals for yourself. I mean, what would you tell?
Yeah, I mean, definitely what you said, plus just educating yourself, and not like, what I always think helped me was looking at people that were successful, what they did, especially people that were in prison, and how they succeeded in life, and just study those type of people, and man, just copy what they're doing, because obviously they're doing something right. So
they're emulating success.
Yeah, I mean, just do that. I mean, you go far away. Read books, especially entrepreneur books. Those are, man, you can't fail with those. So
for, like, say, a youngster going into the system, man, if you could have done something different, or if you could excuse me, if you could change something about the system to make it more productive for a person, so they could actually get back into society without having, as many issues, what would you change about a program in a prison for a person such as yourself, a younger version?
They need, I think, more rehabilitation programs in the higher security prisons, like the USPs for once. Like there's not like these are the guys that need it because not everybody in them are going to be in there for the rest of their life.
Mm-hmm.
But they're taking them out. They're taking these programs. So how do you
Idle time.
Yeah, and then you have all, and that's where it goes back to them setting everybody against each other because you don't have nothing else to do. They're taking, I mean,
The college programs.
Yeah,
a
they're
lot
taking
of the,
everything.
Yeah, trade programs.
I remember I did a college program for University of Miami in Ohio. It was all male, and they stopped it. They said you can't do that anymore. You can't apply for financial aid in there, nothing anymore. So
Wow.
that's what. But if you were first going in there, I would just say, just educate yourself as much as you can to stay away from anybody that has a negative influence on you. Don't get like gambling. Gambling is like a doorway for everything. So, and you think you're passing time. You're like, oh, we're just playing poker a little bit, but it just goes. That's just the door that you don't want to open, and because the type of people you'll be around there are negative, and it's hard to obviously be around positive people in prison, but they're in there. You just have to search them out. Stay in the law library. That's where all the positive people seem to be at.
Yeah. But law library for sure. I mean, and it's a lot of, you cross a lot of racial lines in there. I mean, I learned from my mentor was an old white guy from Missouri, ex fucking Vietnam veteran. You made a good point, man, about education. I think being educated to some degree allow the person to make better choices, and you don't look at people the same. When you're more educated, you're not gonna walk around with that hatred and look like, well, why don't I, and believe what this other guy's trying to tell you to think about somebody else,
Yeah, that ignorance is lifted from you because it's the same with me. I used to go to the law library a lot, and it was actually a guy that was a BGF, Black Guerrilla family, that I didn't really get close to him, but that dude helped me so much. Like he wasn't even really like part of that anymore. Like he's fighting his case, but you know how some of those guys are with life. They always have that hope of getting out and stuff. But he taught me so much, and I had to get past that. Like, man, I don't want this guy helping me. Like, that's the thoughts that it wasn't because he was black. It was more because of what I would think or what I thought the people in the yard would think of me. So it's like you're thinking, like, what are they going to say if I'm talking to this dude? But I was
because
like,
you're learning from somebody from another race.
I was like, screw that. I don't care. He's going to help me. Because he was really educated on it. And, so, I mean, the law library is just, amazing. I love it.
What are some of the goals and stuff you have for yourself right now, like things you want to accomplish in the near future?
It's a hard one because most of my goals are set for my wife and kids. Like because I was such a selfish person in my past that I had to stop like making it just about me. But it's like my business goals, I'm starting a marketing company for customer acquisition for businesses because I want to help even get people that are former drug dealers mainly, or any criminals, but use the skills they did as a drug dealer and turn them into a marketing business. Because I mean, it's the same principle.
Same principle.
How you got customers that way, why can't you do it for a legit business?
Exactly.
So that is one of my goals, is getting that business up and running. I have got the website made, but it's not active yet, and so in the next 3 months I'm hoping to do that.
Okay.
So that's one of my short-term goals, but long-term goal is obviously to be able to change lives. I have a house and some land that I want to eventually in the next 2 years set up for guys getting out of prison, to be able to go to a rural environment that is not there's nothing negative around where I live at or where that house is going to be at. So that's a pretty big goal for me, to get that up and running. So.
And if you had something to share about what you got going on with your channel and your social media, what would you like to tell the fans out there?
It's like my channel is based off of more just the harsh realities of what prison was like for me, so somebody else doesn't have to experience, because I don't want people to think that prison's a fun place. It's not. there's not one time I can look back and be like, man, I had a good time in there. Like, it was just not. Like, I know some people glamorize prison, but it's not a glamorous place. It's dreadful. It's just full of misery. And so I try to use my channel to just share my experiences that happened to me or that I've seen happen to guys, and hopes people don't want to go.
Well, man, that's a hell of a story, man, and I'm glad you were able to make the transition to become somebody that's productive, that can share, so that other people can listen to you and maybe reflect on their own life. Because, you know, if I would have had that growing up, instead of the OGs let me sell dope and be running around, I'd have been like, you know, I could have been maybe a professional skateboarder or something, man. You know, but I think having, you know, what you're doing and coming on the show, I think it's a positive influence, man. So I appreciate you, you know, taking the time to do an interview with us, man.
I appreciate you taking the time, because I've always remember watching your channel for the first time. I was like, man, like that gave me inspiration to do what I was doing. So, but I didn't want to like copy yours. So I was like, I'm just going to tell the realities of what prison was like for me. So, I mean, hopefully you give a lot of people that motivation. So keep us all out of prison. Thanks to Big Herc.
Hey, there you have it. Big Herc, fresh out, beyond lockdown. It's going down. Lockdown's over. Get your yard time in. Exclusively at FreshOutSeries.com.